Part 1. Maria walked up the creaky steps slowly, almost ceremonially, as if she was afraid to disturb someone who might still be in this house, despite the absence of life in it. The old mansion at the intersection of Voronezh Street and Orkhavaya Alley had not seen the light of day for many years. When her grandfather died, the house froze, as if the clock in it had stopped, refusing to count the time any longer. 2 months had passed since then. Only now had Maria found the strength to return. On the key that lay in the envelope with the will, the inscription was scratched, "Clock Room." She did not attach any importance to it, until this morning, when she woke up with a clear, almost physical certainty that something in the house was waiting for her. Not something, someone. Inside, there was a smell of dust, old paper, and a slight dampness, like in a library that no one had opened for decades. Maria slowly walked through the rooms. Everything here was exactly the same as in her childhood. In the kitchen, faded curtains with birds. In the living room, an armchair with an embroidered pillow, on which her grandfather liked to doze after the morning radio. Only in the mirrors there was something wrong. The reflections seemed a little late, as if the house was remembering her slowly, uncertainly. She went up to the attic at the end of the day, when the sun was falling through the dusty windows at an acute angle, casting long shadows. The attic space was the same as she remembered, a low ceiling, wooden beams, old boxes covered with rags. But now, there was a door. Tall, narrow, with a dial instead of a handle. It was not there in childhood. Maria knew this for sure, like one knows the smell of a loved one's home or the rustle of a night street outside the window. She pulled the metal arrow. The door opened with a crunch, as if the house reluctantly let her in. Inside was a round room lined with wood panels. Above it, just under the ceiling, was the mechanism of a tower clock, large gears, springs, and a pendulum that, despite the abandonment of the house, continued to move. In the corner stood a desk, covered in dust. On it was a stack of letters. All the envelopes were addressed to her. In her grandfather's handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened the first one. Inside was a neat text. "You are reading this letter, so you have found the room. I always knew that you would return one day. I am sorry that I left you so much silence. But not everything is forgotten. It is just, not everything is remembered yet." Maria pressed the letter to her chest, closed her eyes. Her grandfather was a man of few words in life, reserved, almost distant. But this phrase, "not everything is remembered yet," seemed to push something inside. As if he knew that she would forget someday. The next letter was shorter. It began with a date, September 21, 1998. The day she disappeared for a few hours in the park and couldn't tell anyone about it. She was a child then. And the letter described where she went, who she met, what she said. And it was all true. But her grandfather couldn't know that. She put the envelope back, but everything inside was already shaking. The house under the clock seemed to be holding its breath. The mechanism above her head continued to work, the pendulum swinging evenly, like a heart. And in this room, full of dust, forgotten paper, and clocks, time suddenly ceased to be something linear. It became personal. Alive. Almost dangerous. Maria didn't know what she expected from these letters. But she knew that she couldn't leave. Chapter 2. Letters that don't wait for an answer. Maria returned to the room under the clock early in the morning. She had barely slept, listening to the house live at night. The old walls were breathing, the stairs were creaking for no reason, and the hands of the tower clock were clicking louder than usual, as if they were counting not just time, but something more, the steps of her memories. At dawn, she climbed the stairs again, barefoot, so as not to wake the echo. The room still smelled of old paper, dust, and a barely noticeable aroma of wax, like in her grandfather's library, where she, 6 years old, was allowed to read only on the second floor, under supervision. Everything seemed untouched, as if she had not left here in the evening. On the table lay a letter that she had not had time to open. The envelope was wrapped in a silk ribbon. Inside were 2 sheets of paper, covered in neat handwriting. You may not remember right away. Memory is not a drawer, Maria. It is a box with a double bottom. Everything you did not want to remember, you hid yourself. But here, in this room, you cannot lie. Not to me, not to yourself. If you have found the key, it means you have already begun to remember. But before you reveal the truth, you must go through the path again. Through the rooms. Through the shadows. Through the places that were more important than you knew. The room under the clock is not the last. It is the first. Maria reread these lines several times. Her hands trembled slightly. The feeling was strange, as if the letter was not simply addressed to her, but as if it knew in advance what exactly she would feel, in what order she would pick up the letters, how many times she would reread them. She began to examine the walls of the room. Under a layer of dust, there was a slight pattern, a spiral going up. Or down. She was not sure. The light from the stained glass played with the shapes, and the longer she looked, the clearer it seemed. The walls narrowed slightly towards the ceiling, as if they were compressing the air. Or guarding something. She noticed a hatch in the floor, hidden under the carpet. The metal handle was cold against her fingers. She did not dare open it, not yet. Instead, she returned to the table and opened the next envelope. You thought you left of your own free will. But it was not your choice. You closed your eyes to what happened in the garden. To that night. But the house remembers. And I remember. You must go back there. Start with the window. The one you looked through then. Maria shuddered. The window really did pop into her memory, overgrown with ivy, with a chip in the lower corner of the glass. As a child, she often hid behind the heavy curtain and peeped at the garden. But what did she see then? Why did her heart beat so fast, as if in response to something forgotten and important? Her gaze darted to the clock. 6 in the morning. But the hands were wrong, the minute hand was shaking, and the hour hand had slightly tilted back. As if time in this room were not moving in a circle, but looping, like water in a well. Maria went downstairs. She passed the hall, along the corridor, to the old living room. The window, the same one, covered in dust and cobwebs, was still standing in the same corner. She pulled the curtain, and a thin light broke through the glass. Everything in the garden was overgrown. The lilacs had long since gone wild, the flower beds had disappeared. But in the depths, under a spreading pear tree, the outline of something wooden was visible. A small table, perhaps. Or an old bench. The wind stirred the branches, and the leaves swayed like the fingers of someone calling her to come out. And she understood, her grandfather had not simply left her a house. He had left her a route. Through rooms, through letters, through her own childhood. Memory does not let go until you open your eyes yourself. Maria turned around, and it seemed to her that up above, in the window under the tower clock, someone was standing and looking at her. But, as before, it could have been just a trick of the light. Or not. Chapter 3. The garden that never falls asleep. When Maria stepped out into the garden, the morning air burned her lungs with its freshness. It seemed as if she had entered a place carved out of the past. The grass was wet with dew, and each step left a clear trace, as if the earth beneath her feet had just woken up. Everything around was quiet, too quiet, as it is before a thunderstorm, or in dreams, when time seems to have stopped. The pear tree, under which the letter had said to look for an answer, stood majestically, with spreading branches, reaching down to the very ground. There really was a table under it, almost disappearing under a carpet of moss and fallen lilac petals. Maria came closer. On its surface lay an old box, covered in mold and rust. There was no lock, only a rope tied in a neat knot. She untied it and lifted the lid. Inside were things that made no sense individually: an old compass, a piece of amber, a faded photograph of a girl running across a field with a kite, and a scrap of parchment. But together, they evoked such a distinct sense of déjà vu that Maria felt dizzy. On the parchment was a short text, written in the same familiar handwriting. "You haven't forgotten. You were just hiding. In this garden, something was once said that changed everything. Return to that place. Become a witness. And then you will understand why time has stopped." She looked around. To the side, closer to the old greenhouse, stood a dilapidated white chair. It was here, as it now seemed to her, that her grandfather had once told her fairy tales. About clocks that do not show time, but show memory. About rooms that appear only when you are ready to discover the truth within yourself. The garden seemed to come alive. Somewhere a bird began to twitter. The branches stirred, and drops fell from them, like fragile signs. And suddenly, a child's voice. Thin, trembling, almost a whisper. It rushed past her ear, barely touching her consciousness. "You promised not to forget." Maria turned around, but there was no one. Only her own reflection in the broken glass of the greenhouse. Only her shadow, stretched out along the path, as if someone was following her. She returned to the house. She went up to the room under the clock, and on the table, as she feared, lay a new letter. She had been gone only half an hour. But the letter was already waiting. The ribbon was blue. If you are reading this, then you have heard the voice again. It comes when the past demands to be noticed. Do not be afraid. Ghosts are not here to scare. They are here to remind you who you are. But be careful. If you open everything at once, you may not be able to bear the whole truth. The next room is behind the mirror. Maria's heart sank. She looked up. The mirror in the room was ordinary, covered with a light patina of time. But now, when she looked into it, the surface seemed to breathe. And in the reflection, just for a moment, a girl flashed. Very similar to her. Chapter 4. Behind the mirror. Maria stood before the mirror, holding her breath. The reflection did not look hostile, but it was not familiar either. It seemed to be waiting. As if the glass itself knew more than it should, and it was up to her whether she could look beyond its surface. She ran her finger along the cold glass. It responded, a slight vibration, a tremor that she felt not so much on her skin as somewhere under her heart. And at that moment the reflection blinked. There was no Maria in it. Only a room. Empty. She jerked her hand away, and heard a click. A narrow panel opened to the right of the mirror, revealing a corridor. Narrow, paneled in old wood, with lamps shining with a dim amber light. Footsteps echoed dully, like in a museum of memory. There was another door at the end of the corridor. Simple, with a brass handle. It opened without a sound. It was a nursery. Small, dusty, with toys neatly arranged on the shelves. A teddy bear with a torn-off ear, a set of blocks, a wooden horse. But a strange feeling came over her at once, as if she had not entered the room, but returned there. Everything here knew her. And everything was left as if the child was about to return. There was an album on the bed. Maria opened it and saw photographs. Her grandfather, the garden, the room with the clock, but in one of the last photographs there was a boy. Very small, with big eyes. Under him, an inscription in pencil. He was her brother. Until that summer. Maria recoiled. She had no brother. Never. But the face seemed vaguely familiar. Or was it a mistake? A photograph of someone else's child? She turned the page. You didn't want to remember. You were too small, and you hid it all. even from yourself. But everything remained here. The house remembered. And it waited for you to return. The air in the room became thicker. A gust of wind blew through the window, the curtains fluttered, and chalk marks suddenly appeared on the floor, as if someone had walked barefoot across the floor and disappeared. Maria felt the memory emerge in her: water, a scream, a desperate, grab my hand, and emptiness. Her breath caught. She ran out of the room, but the corridor was different. Endless. There were mirrors on the walls. In each one, she, but not only she. A girl, a teenager, a woman. Faces that she once wore. And among them, him. A child. Her brother. Or her brother's shadow. The house closed. Maria fell to her knees. Everything that was forgotten returned. Memory, like an icy stream, flooded her. And only one voice sounded inside. If you find me again, I can leave. But if you stay, you will become me. You will become the one everyone has forgotten. Maria stood up. She understood, this house is not just a house. It is a memory trap. A place where the forgotten lives. And only by making a choice, to remember until the end or to leave forever, can she be free.